It's with great pleasure that I introduce Mr. Rifat Bali.
Thank you, George, and thank you really for, it has been a very demanding, I think 2 weeks already, and thank you for accompanying me and introducing me to all the audiences where I have been doing this lecture. So, first of all, I would like to formally thank the Zoryan Institute, who organized this tour and also sponsored the translation of the book, which took many, many years, very demanding job. And the Armenian General Benevolent Union, the Armenian Missionary Association of Canada, the Bolso High Cultural Association of Toronto, Daughters of the Vartan Artemis Ortiak, Holy Trinity Armenian Church, Knights of Vartan Alishan Lodge, and the St. Gregory Armenian Catholic Church. And it's also a pleasure to meet all the eski İstanbullu hemşerilerim, Bolso Highs, who are now living here. For those of you who have no idea of what the Turkish Jewish community is, I would like first to start by giving you a small overview of what we are talking. It's a small community which was in the early 1900s about 150,000. Today it's about 18,000–20,000 people. Most of them live in Istanbul. Only 1,500 people live in Izmir, and there is maybe 1 or 2 families living in Adana, Ankara, and Mersin. And that's all the old Anatolian Jewish communities have disappeared. They either went to Israel or they came to Istanbul or Izmir. They are all Sephardim, not Ashkenaz. They are, let's say, a medium, not a very young community. The medium age, I think, is about 40. They have 2 main concerns, which are universal concerns of all minorities and of all Jewish diaspora communities. One is assimilation, interfaith marriage between Jews and Muslims in Turkey, and the second is security and anti-Semitism, which are together linked. Security and anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism is quite widespread in the Islamist and nationalist circles in Turkey. Security, because we had a number of cases of synagogue attacks and so on, the last one being the 2003 synagogue bombings. And again, just before this 2003 synagogue bombings, a few months before, we had a hate crime. A Jewish dentist was murdered because he was just a Jew, and by Islamist terrorists. Zionism and the State of Israel are 2 concepts which are totally demonized. So you will not find a Turkish Jew who will publicly speak and advocate for Israel or speak positively for Israel, and who will never say that he is a Zionist. It's just the contrary. He has to say that he is very critical of Zionism and he is very critical of the State of Israel, of their attitude toward the Palestinians. The Turkish Jews have a low profile. The leadership strategy is to have a low profile. Why? Because they don't want to create problems. They don't want to have cases where they will start having press attacks against them and they will not be able to answer them, so they want to keep quiet. The only case where they had a high profile is the subject of this book, which started in the mid-70s, and the high profile was, and I will speak in detail, doing public advocacy in support of the Turkish Republic's efforts, mainly in the United States, against the recognition of the Armenian Genocide. So, the book itself has a small introduction which speaks about the years 1923 to 1946. It speaks about the Turkish Jews' fight to be considered as Turks, I mean Turkish citizens. It speaks about their legal fight against anti-Semitism with no success at all. It speaks about the tense tension between relations, American Jewish organizations and American Armenian organizations in the United States, and the tense relations between Jews and Armenians in Turkey. This tense relations is simply coming from the fact that this American Jewish organization are all the time trying to influence the Congress to stop recognizing the genocide. The book shows how the leadership of a small discriminated community, which was discriminated like the other minorities, Armenians and Greeks, all of a sudden in mid-70s started to become involved in public advocacy, in lobbying, let's say, in support of the Turkish Republic for three things. In supporting Turkish Republic efforts for denying the Armenian genocide, denying the recognition of the Armenian genocide, in supporting Turkey's effort to become a member of EU, and in supporting the public diplomacy efforts of the Turkish Republic, trying to portray itself as a country very tolerant of its minorities, where minorities lived peacefully and in harmony with the Muslim society for decades. So the book title is Model Citizens. What do I mean by model citizens? I have my own definition of model citizens, which is based on a number of criteria. To be considered as a model citizen by the Turkish society and by the Turkish establishment, you have to fulfill the following criteria. You have to be loyal and obedient to the Turkish state. You have to be assimilated to the Turkish culture. You have to be assimilated to the Turkish nationalism, which means you have to be a Turkish nationalist. You don't have to be involved in ethnic nationalism. In the case of Turkish Jews, you don't have to be a Zionist. You cannot be a Zionist and a Turkish Jew. You can only be a Turkish Jew and a Turkish nationalist. You cannot be critical of the Turkish state in public space. You should and you cannot ask privately or in public space of any sort of indemnities, compensation and similar things for the past events which happened in Turkey, like for example the well-known, the notorious wealth tax, the varlık vergisi. You cannot ask for 80 years later even to be compensated for what happened with the varlık vergisi. So Turkish Jews are model citizens because they fulfill these requirements. They are a model for whom? They are a model for the Armenians and Greeks, and who is showing them as a model? It's the Turkish establishment who is showing mainly to the Armenians Turkish Jews as a model. I will give you as an example of this. In 1998, those of you who are from Turkey or Istanbul, you may remember that there was a lot of discussions in the Turkish press of who will be the next Armenian patriarch. There were two candidates. One was Mesrop Mutafyan and the other Shahan Sıvacıyan, and Mutafyan was considered as a nationalist from the Turkish point of view, while Sıvacıyan was considered as a mild man, middle of the road, which may not create problems. And during all these discussions, one well-known retired Turkish ambassador published an editorial saying, addressing itself to the Armenians of Turkey, saying, why are you trying to create problems with Ankara? You should, are you out of your mind? You should take the Jews of Turkey as an example on how to behave correctly and properly with Ankara. Don't create problems. So Turkish Jews are a model because they fulfill this criteria, and on top of that they are a model because they have a track record of being a model. Right after the Republic was established in 1923, and before that we had minority rights, positive rights recognized to the minorities during the Lausanne Peace Treaty, and right after that the Turkish Republic was established. So the Turkish Jews were the first minority which renounced to the minority rights recognized to them by the Lausanne Treaty, because they were pressed by the Turkish press. They were under pressure from Ankara to behave as a model, because what they were saying, well, you have not been involved in any sort of, let's say, betrayal of the fatherland, so take the lead, show to the other non-Muslims, and renounce to the rights. They renounced, and then the Armenians followed, and then the Greeks. And then in 1928, you have a Turkish-Jewish businessman and intellectual who published the Handbook of Turkification, Turkification, which was addressing to the Turkish Jews, and there was 10 commandments, and the name of this intellectual was Moise Cohen. So it was like the new 10 commandments of Moses. And among the 10 commandments was that you had to Turkify your name, you have to assimilate, you have to speak in public space Turkish, you have to pray in Turkish, and so on. So all these years, from 1923 until the end of World War II, these were really dark years for the minorities, and Turkish Jews were under high pressure to assimilate and to Turkify themselves. So the Turkification project that was applied during those years was a sort of social engineering project, social contract. The Turkish Republic promised to the non-Muslims that they will be considered as Turkish citizens. Before that, during the Ottoman Empire, they were considered as dhimmis, meaning people of the book, which are under the protection of the Muslims, but not equal to them. So the Republic, when it promised to them equality, it was sort of upgrading their social status. But this social contract was two-sided. Ankara wanted that they Turkify themselves, the minorities Turkify themselves, and if they do so, they will be recognized as equal to Turks of the Christian or Jewish faith, equal to Turks of the Muslim faith. So this social project was okay if Ankara had kept its promise. It did not keep, the Turkish Jews especially made all effort to assimilate and Turkify themselves, and still they were considered, and all the other minorities, as non-Muslims. Why? Because the social memory, the collective social memory of the Turkish society was the legacy of the Ottoman Empire. For 700 years, this Ottoman Empire was run like Muslims and non-Muslims, Muslims being the masters, non-Muslims being below them. And the society could not change its minds, the leadership could not change its minds, they were dhimmis. So a Turk could only be a Muslim. Since they were not Muslims, they were not Turks. That's so simple. Therefore, they were discriminated. Although they were Turkish citizens, they were discriminated. They could not serve in the army, they could not be in public service. And in 1940, first of all, before 1942, in 1941, all non-Muslims were sent to labor battalions to construct roads and so on. And right after they were released, then came the notorious wealth tax, varlık vergisi, which was applied discriminately and arbitrarily to non-Muslims, and all the non-Muslims really were bankrupt. They lost all their assets, and even so they could not pay their taxes. Those who could not pay were sent to near the Turkish-Russian border to do forced labor under winter conditions. So that was the end of the Turkification project, which was a total failure. So the book is speaking, as George said, from a period of time which follows these dark years of the Republic. It starts from 1950s onwards. 1950s onwards were a totally different atmosphere. First of all, the Turkification, the pressure on the minorities to Turkify and assimilate themselves to the Turkish society, you do not encounter it from 1950 onwards. You don't find any articles which orders them to speak Turkish publicly and so on. Why? There are few reasons. First of all, Turkey wanted to be part of the free world right after the Second World War. You had the communist bloc and you had the free world, and Turkey wanted to be part of the free world, became a member of the United Nations, signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, and more importantly, it was a multi-party period. Multiple parties were competing to get the votes, while before, between 1923 and 46, it was a sort of dictatorship. Only one single party, which was the Republican People Party, founded by the founding fathers of the Republic, and where non-Muslims were not even could not even become member. So from 1950 onwards, there was a competition that was like in economy, a free market. So if it was a free market, the minority vote at that time counted. Today, the minority vote doesn't count because it's all together 100,000 non-Muslims in a country of 75 million people. There is no minority vote. In the 50s, there was a minority vote, especially in Istanbul, which was a small city in comparison to today. And if you had minority candidates on your list, and if they could be elected, you could have, as a party, you could raise more members of parliament. So the parties were after the minorities to get their votes. They were asking the community leaders to suggest names that they were putting on top of the list, and these people were elected. And from 46 onward, 50s onward, until 1960, you could find members of parliament, non-Muslim members of parliament. And the Democrat Party, which in 1950 became the government until 1960, which was, let's say, a split of the previous single party, Republican People Party, in order to get the minority vote, all the time promised to the minority community leaders that if they were elected, they would pass a law which will indemnify the 1942 Varlıkvergisi, with the wealth tax, which never happened. It was just rhetoric to get the votes of the minorities. In this period of time, we see a new scenario which started and which is still valid until today. We see that minorities face new situations, new challenges. First, they became and they are still becoming scapegoats. Secondly, they are hostage in Turkey. Thirdly, you see that they are becoming actors in public diplomacy. This is only valid for Turkish Jews. And fourthly, you see that they are used as bargaining assets in diplomatic negotiations. What do I mean by all these four different scenarios? By scapegoat, I mean that all sorts of problems that Turkey might have, social or economic or political problem, this could be blamed either on the Armenian diaspora or on the international Zionism or on the Jewish lobby. These are the three evils from the Turkish nationalist point of view, and it's still valid until today. By hostage, I mean that the minorities have no room to maneuver in the Turkish society. They are perceived as people whose loyalty probably do not stand with Turkey, whose loyalty stand with Israel, Armenia or Greece. Therefore, if there is a problem between Turkey and its neighboring countries, Greek or Armenia or Israel, they are the first to feel the pressure, because the society look to them and to see on which side they will be siding. Will they be siding with Israel or Armenia, or will they be siding with Turkey? So they feel obliged to publicly declare their loyalty to the Turkish society, and I will give you two specific examples for Armenians. In 1934, you had a project to make a movie of the famous Franz Werfel book, 40 Days on Musada. and the MGM studio in America wanted to make the movie. The Turkish ambassador intervened in order to block it, and he succeeded. But there was so much pressure on the Turkish side, on Turkish Armenians, to have their opinion on what they were thinking of this project. The Turkish Armenians found the idea by copying the Nazis at that time, because Franz Werfel was a Jew. They felt so much pressure that they organized an event where they burned the Franz Werfel photo and the book. In 1965, it was the 50th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide, being commemorated mainly in Lebanon and United States, with many articles appearing in the Turkish press, and again the Turkish press and the Turkish society were looking to the eyes of the Armenian community of Istanbul to see on which side they were siding. So they felt again obliged to make a public gesture. The different community leaders made declarations that they were loyal Turkish patriots. And then one morning they went to the Taksim Square, where you have a monument which represents the Turkish National War of Independence, where they put some flowers and made a public declaration that they are loyal Turkish citizens and they are with the Turkish Republic. The third thing is what I mentioned, that they are considered as bargaining assets in diplomatic negotiations. And the example this time is from the Greeks. Turkey and Greece had a problem over Cyprus, a problem which still exists, and Turkey wanted to put pressure on Greece at the negotiation tables, and in 1955 they had this bright idea that in order to show to the Greek side that the Turkish society was a very nationalist society, and if the Greek side could not give away concessions to Turkey, bad things might happen in Turkey because it's a nationalist society against Greeks living in Turkey. So they had the bright idea to organize a small-scale riot against Greek-owned shops, churches, and so on. This, as in any moment, things went out of control, and this small-scale riot turned into something like the Crystal Nights, which you had in Germany in 1933. Churches, cemeteries, newspapers, shops, everything was looted, burned. Armenians as well suffered, and Jews were suffered. And this showed that, again, that, the minorities were expendable. They could be, used as a benchmark, as an expendable asset for bigger things. The public advocacy thing, which I mentioned and which is the core subject of this book, is mainly for Turkish Jews. So what do I mean by that they became actors in public diplomacy? In order to understand the circumstances surrounding the events which led them to become public advocates in support of the Turkish Republic until today, which is because it's a policy which continues until today, you have to get back in the time machine and go back to the 70s and remember what happened in the 70s with Turkey. First of all, in 1973, you had the first murder of a Turkish diplomat in the United States in California by an American Armenian old man. Secondly, in 1974, you had the Turkish army intervening in Cyprus over the Cyprus problem. And right after that, you had the United States putting in place an arms embargo against Turkey. Immediately after that, you had American Armenian and American Greek organization becoming extremely active in the United States. Greeks, because of what happened, human rights, human losses, all sorts of problems, human rights problems in Cyprus after the Turkish army intervened, and American Armenians for getting the genocide recognized by the US Congress. Then after a few years, another important event started. All of you know about the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., which opened in 1993, but the start of the project was 1978. The President of United States signed a decree in 1978 to construct a memorial. So this was not a Jewish museum, this was a federal museum, a federal American museum, therefore, and it was a museum for the Holocaust, for genocide and so on. Therefore, normally and logically, Armenians should be represented in the museum. And that was a fight which started to go on from 1978 until 1993, whether or not Armenian genocide will be represented in the permanent exposition of the museum. At the end of the day, the Turks won over, and today you have only a small quote from Adolf Hitler, who said that who remembers the Armenians, I mean, when he was master planning the Holocaust, who said that who remembers the Armenians. 1978 again, the same year, you had the movie Midnight Express. Midnight Express was a movie which based on a true story, which was a book published before. It was a young American student coming to Turkey and then returning and trying to smuggle cocaine out of Turkey. He was found and put in prison for a long term. Then he escaped from prison, and the book was first published a book. Then the book became a very famous movie, where you could see the terrible condition in the Turkish prisons and so on. So all these things, one after the other, made a big impact on the Turkish image here in the States. This Turkish image was not very bright. People were perceiving Turks as barbaric and so on. So all these events coming one after the other enhanced the barbaric image of Turkey and created a big public relations problem for Turkey. So at that time, the Turkish president made an appeal to the Turkish businessmen, to the Turkish leading businessmen association. He said, you have the networks, you have the money, you have the languages, you have the skills, you are Turkish citizens, you have to perform your duty as Turkish citizens, go to United States, perform your duty, show them the right cause that the Turkey has over the Cyprus issue, over the Armenian genocide and so on. So about 10 people were chosen from this association to travel to Washington, and among these 10 people there was 2 Jews and 1 Armenian. Of the 2 Jews, 1 dropped later on, and the Armenian also dropped later on. The only Turkish Jew who remained was Mr. Jacques Kamhi. Why 2 Jews and 1 Armenian? Because the idea was simple. They wanted, the Turkish establishment wanted that the Armenian connects with its counterparts in United States, the Turkish Jews connects with its counterparts in United States, because they are brothers. The Turkish Armenian and Turkish Jews could better explain and convince their counterparts in the just cause of Turkey. So, of course, an Armenian of Istanbul would never convince an Armenian living in United States. So, the project, the Armenian dropped from this race. Then it was Mr. Kamhi, the Turkish Jew, who had to network and convince. You have to remember that in the 1970s, the American Jewish organization were not, let's say, in support of Turkey. They were more in a loose alliance with the Greek and Armenian organization in America. They were not interested with Turkey. So Mr. Kamhi's job was to make them known that the Turkish Jewish community was living in Istanbul, in Turkey, was fine, that we had 500 years of tolerance, and Turkey was misrepresented in United States, and American Jewish organization interest was to support Turkey in its efforts in its efforts in the States. Then, you know, the Turks and the Turkish society had and still has an exaggerated view of the power of the power of the so-called Jewish lobby. They believe that the Jewish lobby makes policy, is influential in policy making in the White House, and since they believe they are influential, so they can do they could solve any sort of problems of Turkey. And Mr. Kamhi just enhanced this perception. He said, yes, of course, and later on other leaders, he said, yes, of course, we can solve the problems, they are very powerful and so on. You know, it's like the bazaar mentality. You just tell them that your good is extremely, what you are selling is extremely valuable and so on, and they believed it. On top of that, at the end of the 80s, we had another problem, which forced the American Jewish organization to really side with Turkey. The problem was that in July 1980, Israel declared Jerusalem as its capital. And right after that, Turkey reduced its diplomatic representation to second secretary level as like today. So in the agenda of the American Jewish organization and in the agenda of the Turkish Jewish leadership, another thing came on, which is to restore Turkey-Israel relationship to its former level. So two things, to restore Turkish-Israeli relations to its former level and to have the American Jewish organization support Turkey's efforts to block any sort of bill presented to the US Congress. So that was until 1980. We had a military coup in 1980. A new military government was established right after, and this new military government transformed this project on a more organized way. They supported they set up a task force, again with Jewish and Armenian leaders. They supported all sorts of efforts, of public advocacy effort in United States, because they believe the Jewish lobby is very influential. So again, visits happened to the States and things were going this way. A very coincidental thing was going to happen 10 years later. We are in the mid-80s, and 12 years later, 10, 12 years later, we will have the quincentennial anniversary of the arrival of the Sephardim, those who were expelled from Spain in 1492 with the Inquisition, who came in 1492 to the Ottoman lands. So the Turkish Jews the Ottoman Jews had celebrated this in its 400th year, in 1892. So another century passed, so it was a good thing to celebrate it in 1992, in 10 years' time, the quincentennial anniversary. And we were in the early 80s. So in the early 80s, the Turkish Jewish leadership, because we also had a military government, wanted to perform its duty as a citizen, as a community, and proposed a project to the government to celebrate this thing which would happen in 10 years later. The government, of course, accepted enthusiastically, and a foundation was established in 1989 to celebrate in 1992 the quincentennial anniversary. The foundation name was the Quincentennial Foundation. The president was Mr. Kamhi, the businessman who came in 1974 to the United States. A branch of it was established in New York, the Quincentennial Foundation of New York, to celebrate the events in New York. The Turkish state supported these efforts by paying $4 million for all these events. There were three categories of members in the community: A, Turkish Jewish businessmen and leaders; B, retired Turkish ambassadors. The general secretary was a retired Turkish ambassador; and C, Turkish Muslim businessmen. So you had this hybrid type of members, because they wanted to give the impression that it was not a Jewish foundation, it was a Turkish foundation. The foundation had two purposes. The official purpose was to celebrate the quincentennial anniversary, and the rhetoric used all those years was that, well, thank you that you were so tolerant towards we Jews, that you accepted us in 1492. We had 500 years of tolerances, and we are grateful for that. Secondly, we are grateful that you accepted German Jewish scientists in 1933 fleeing Germany and coming to Turkey to work in universities. Thirdly, the Turkish diplomats saved Turkish Jews. We are grateful for them during World War II, Turkish Jews who were living in France, in Nazi-dominated countries. So out of these three things, the last two, Turkey, German Jewish scientists coming to Turkey and Turkish diplomats saving Turkish Jews, there are true facts and there are a lot of disinformation. The true fact is that yes, about 80 German Jewish scientists came to Turkey to work at universities, but this was not an open check. Turkey did not open its arms, as the rhetoric says, and welcomed everybody fleeing from Nazi Germany. They made it very clear, only 80, 100 people, that's all. Turkish Jews were saved by only one Turkish diplomat, the Rhodes Consul General, who is the only diplomat recognized by Yad Vashem. All the other diplomats and so on, because the rhetoric is so loose that you believe that there are thousands of German Jewish scientists who came to Turkey, or there are tens of Turkish diplomats saving thousands of Jews from Nazi-invaded France. It's not the case. It's misrepresentation, it's disinformation. Because the rhetoric wanted to portray Turkey as a very tolerant country of its minorities, the benchmark, the example being the Turkish Jews. In this rhetoric, there was two anti-Armenian themes used, and the aim to use these anti-Armenian themes was that to put a distance between an eventual rapprochement between American Jewish organizations and American Armenian organizations. The two anti-Armenian themes was first, the uniqueness of the Holocaust. The uniqueness of the Holocaust is a theme which is used in Turkey. I mean, it's not used abroad, because in Turkey we don't have the word Shoah or Holocaust. We have only the word soykırım, which means genocide. So instead of using Holocaust, we use Nazi genocide, Nazi soykırımı. So if the Nazi genocide is such a terrible thing, how can you compare? That is the question that people address to Turkish Jews. How can you compare the Armenian genocide to the Nazi genocide? It's not the same thing. So don't share your Holocaust with the Armenians. That was the theme used. The second anti-Armenian theme used was that there was an Armenian legion in the Nazi army during World War II. Yes, there was an Armenian legion in the Nazi army, but if you listen to the rhetoric, you would believe that all Armenians were Nazis or all Armenians were Nazi sympathizers. So this propaganda or public relations efforts were also supported by two movies. One movie which was produced in the States, Desperate Hours, in 2001. The Desperate Hours movie, which is a documentary, docudrama, narrated the story of the German Jewish scientists which were coming to Turkey, and allegedly the Turkish diplomats saving Turkish Jews in France and so on during World War II. 10 years later, this film was very successful. It was shown at the US Congress, everywhere in the United States. 10 years later, we have another movie called Turkish Passport in 2011. This time the movie was produced in Turkey, supported by different Turkish organizations. supported by the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and so on. It was again a docudrama showing the Turkish diplomats saving Jews who lived in France. Both they made movies because, you know, today a movie, an image is a million times more influential than anything written. So all these things, the whole story was to disseminate an image of a Turkey which was tolerant towards its minorities, towards the Turkish Jewish minority, and let's say the underlying message, which was the unofficial purpose of the Quincentennial Foundation, was that to put in the mind of the people who listen to the rhetoric, to make them believe that a country which was tolerant for 500 years towards Jews, how can it be accused of committing a crime against humanity? Meaning that how can it make a genocide against the Armenians, because they have a tradition of tolerance. That was the message that was being tried to be given to United States, mainly to United States. So you may think, you may ask to yourself why the Turkish Jewish leadership was involved during all those years, since 1974 until today, in all these efforts. Not only Turkish Jewish leadership, but also, I will tell later, the State of Israel and other organizations. Well, they were forced, let's say, they were pressed, forced, and also verbally threatened. Forced and pressed, and also there is a society of Turkish immigrants in Israel. Those who immigrated to Israel formed a society of Turkish immigrants, and also they were pressed by the Turkish press. The message to both things, to the Association of Turkish Immigrants in Israel and to Turkish Jews in Turkey, was that, you know, you are the model community in Turkey. You are loyal people to the Turkish state. Why don't you perform your duty and go and tell to your co-religionists in the states to start all these projects? This pressure was put either in the case of the Holocaust Museum project, when the American Armenians wanted to be represented, when there were all this fight going on over the years, go and influence the American Jews so that they stop the Armenians, or during the genocide bills. One case, the pressure was that the verbal threats, there was no written thing, but the verbal threats was that if you cannot convince your counterparts in United States, then that's the Turkish diplomats saying to the Turkish Jewish leaders or to American Jewish organization, we cannot guarantee the safety of the Turkish Jewish community in Turkey. That's a serious threat. What they mean by that is that the Turkish society is a nationalist society. If they get very angry, things like can happen, like in 1955 with the anti-Greek riots. You know, say they can bomb synagogues, they can do this and that. And the second threat was that in the 80s you had Jews which were escaping from Iraq, Syria and Iran, entering Turkey illegally with no passport, no papers, and Turkey was closing its eyes and permitting them to go to United States and so on. So they said, if you still do not support us in our efforts in the States, we will no more permit these people coming into Turkey, we will send them back to where they come. Sending back them to Iraq, Syria or Iran means death for these people. So the leadership abroad in Israel or in the States or in Turkey were, of course, took these threats seriously, and they obeyed, you know, they just did what the Turks wanted, that is supporting them. A similar threat, let me say, was also done here in 2005 in Canada. You remember the movie Ararat of Atome Goyan. There was a lot of, again, problems in Turkey. They wanted to have the movie shown or the movie stopped and so on. And finally, the movie, of course, was not shown in Turkey. And then years later, in 2005, the Armenian actress Arsine Kanyan gave an interview to a Turkish newspaper where she said, you are the first Turkish people that I am speaking with. I'm very emotional and this and that. And she said that, you know, when we had the project of making this movie, somebody from the Canadian Turkish Association came to see me, and he wanted to see the script. And we said, of course, we cannot show you the script. He said, okay, since I cannot verify the script and I cannot understand whether there are bad things about Turkey, I will report to my I don't know, ambassador or embassy or consul general, and I will tell them that I have not been able to see the script, and you know, things may go badly in Turkey, and we cannot guarantee the safety of the Armenians in Turkey. So the same sort of threat. And there was also a documentary made by BBC about, I think, late 90s, about how there was a fierce fight in the US between pro and counter groups, pro groups which wanted to have the Armenian genocide accepted in the Congress, Turkey and the other Armenian Jewish organization pressing the congressman and so on. So this congressman who was in support of having the bill passed say that, well, you know, we were under great pressure, and some people told us, we can, if the bill passed the Congress, we cannot guarantee the safety of the Americans living in Turkey. So it's the same pattern, it's the same story going on. Of course, we did not believe he said, but other people, small communities, take these things seriously. So don't get me wrong, it was not only the American Jewish organization or the State of Israel, because the State of Israel officially do not recognize the genocide, or the Turkish Jewish leadership, who were the main perpetrators, the main cause of having not the genocide recognized in the US. If the White House policy was not, if the White House policy did support the recognition of the genocide, without any hesitation, the bill would pass the Congress. The American Jewish organization may be influential, but not influential up to this point. So the interest of the American Jewish organization and the interest of the White House concurred. It was a common interest because the White House wanted to have, and still wants to have, good relations between Turkey and United States, and good relations between Turkey and Israel. And that's why these bills were never accepted. There were other groups, there were US defense industry groups with billions of contracts, with billions of investment in Turkey who supported Turkey. There were multinational US companies with billions of investment or possible investment in Turkey who supported Turkey, multinational Turkish companies, Middle East scholars in the States who signed petitions in the mid-80s. They were at that time signing, but afterwards, with so much publication coming in the next 30 years, nobody, in proving that there was a genocide, nobody is signing any petition. So, what can I conclude of all this story? The conclusion is, as in the preface of the book, the Israeli professor Yair Oron said, the book is about the struggle between moral politics versus real politics. And at the end of the day, it's real politics which win over. The states do not have really, their consideration is not so much human rights and genocide and so on. Their consideration is their interest, this interest of the states, the interest of the business communities. The same goes with the State of Israel, and that's why they have not, the real politics win over. you may wonder where we will be going from today onwards, because in 2 years' time you have the centenary commemoration. I think the same situation will go on like that, because we have a situation where Turkey and Israel relationship are very bad at the lowest level, like in July 1980, and one of the aims of all this commemoration, of all these events, of all these public advocacy events, was to restore Turkey and Israel diplomatic representations, which were at its lowest level in 1980, to its former level, and they succeeded. Part of it was that in 1991, Turkey and Israel had again ambassadorial level relationship. So it's the same story today. What Turkey and Israel, what Israel wants, what the American administration wants, and what the American Jewish organization wants eagerly is to restore Turkey-Israel relations to its former level. Therefore, nobody, from a politician point of view, will put on the table this issue. The Turkish Jewish community, the same will go on. I mean, it's a small community which have no room to maneuver, hostage of a certain policy. They cannot say, well, we are tired, we are really tired, we will no more go on supporting you. This will be considered as a betrayal to the fatherland. No leader can do this. So they will go on and support the Turkish Republic efforts. That is in black and white the picture of what has been going in the last 40 years, and which I think will go on for in the near future. Nobody can foresee what will happen in 50 years' time, but in the next few years this will go on. Thank you for listening to me.